Hey guys, welcome to another Kickstarter review. So today I'm going to be giving my full spoiler review of Oppenheimer. I know this is very late, I should have done this weeks ago, I've just been so busy, but better late than never. So yeah, anyways, I'm going to go into full depth into my thoughts on this film. I got a lot of thoughts about this one, both good and bad, and so I'm going to break it down into that very way, starting with everything I liked and disliked, but before all that, I will just give you my brief summary thoughts before really delving into it. Going into this film, I had really high expectations, not only before its release, but obviously since then, where I've heard a lot of word of mouth, positive word of mouth across the board, basically, with everyone praising the film, saying it's a masterpiece, all these sorts of things. So I had very high expectations going in. But I have to say, that said, coming out of the theater, I was ultimately disappointed, and I was actually finding a lot of problems with the film. I feel this film has a lot of the same issues that a lot of the recent Christopher Nolan films have had, where they're kind of there's a lot of sound problems where the sound kind of overtakes the dialogue, and then you also have like lack of character development where you don't really care about any of the characters, and they're sort of emotionally sterile. Like you just don't feel any of the emotions between any of the characters. There's just dialogue, but nothing really has feeling to it. These are the things that were going through my head as soon as I came out of the theater. Everything I was thinking about with the film that bothered me about it, which was more so overshadowing the aspects that I liked. But I'll go into those things right now and talk about everything I liked before really getting into the things I disliked about this film. First up is the cinematography. With any Christopher Nolan film, you can be assured that regardless of what you may think of the story or some of the characters, he's always going to bring the goods when it comes to a beautifully looking film. Like it just shot beautifully, and all the picture, it doesn't waste any of the space of what's on the screen. And so the cinematography of this film is definitely as good as ever. And so definitely I have to give that a positive for the film that I really liked about it. It was very easy to look at visually. The second thing is the acting. This is probably the part of the film I was most impressed by. This has a stellar cast from top to bottom. You've got big actors giving tiny little roles with like only 1 or 2 lines of dialogue, but there's a stellar cast from start to finish, and they all bring their A game. You know, obviously starting at the top with Cillian Murphy playing Oppenheimer, he's fantastic. And you have Robert Downey Jr., Matt Damon, even people the likes of Gary Oldman shows up, Emily Blunt. Everyone brings the goods, and the acting is top notch. And so look, they really embody their characters very well, despite my thoughts about the emotional aspect of the film, which I felt it tried to convey and I didn't feel came across, had nothing to do with the performances and more to do with editing, which I'll get into later. The third thing I liked is the last hour of this film. So you might think, well, that's a big chunk of the film. Well, it's actually a third of it because it's a 3-hour film. But the final hour is basically, that starts with basically where the bomb goes off, where they do the demonstration to see the test on this bomb. And then from there all the way to the end of the film, I thought was really good and really strong. And the reason I thought that is because it finally started like delving into the themes and dealing with the ramifications of what this bomb poses, both morally, ethically, everything like that. You finally start to see them reckoning with what they have created. Like they've created a monster that is capable of unbelievable destruction. And you finally start to see the emotional dilemma of what this whole film should have been. And unfortunately, it took 2 hours to get to this point. And you could say, well, the characters didn't learn that until after the bomb went off. And that may be true, but still, they should have shown a build up to this dilemma for the first 2 hours so that there's payoffs in the final hour, because this wasn't a payoff. It felt more like a new story that was starting in this final hour. And on top of that, there was a whole new story that basically gets introduced, which is to do with finding out who was the person who was selling secrets, or I should say giving away secrets about Oppenheimer to different authorities. And that kind of really comes into play into the final hour. So it almost becomes a whole different film in that hour. And it was a film that I really liked and I would have liked to have seen more of, but unfortunately it took so long to get there that I was just bothered by so many things in the meantime. But look, in isolation, I have to give credit where it's due. That final hour of the film was pretty fantastic. And yeah, so that was just another thing that I liked about the film. And now for the dislikes. So the first thing that comes to mind is the first hour of this film, which can be really summed up with one word, which is frenetic. My God, it just jumps from scene to scene, all over the place, to different locations, to different people. You meet so many people quickly, and you don't really get to know any of them, and you don't get to see any of the locations or anything, or how anything really relates to one another. And this is a big fault of the editing, I'd put it down to. The editing is all over the place. It chops and chops and chops. It cuts every time someone says something, it cuts to them back and forth, no matter how quick the other person's response is. It barely gives a second to the person who was just on screen. And so it was just doing my head in, seeing this constant choppiness of the film. And it was, I don't know, you could say there's an argument that they were trying to kind of capture the feeling within Oppenheimer's head, who has all these crazy things going on in his head, and they're trying to capture that feeling of frenetic sort of energy. But as a viewer, it just was very it just put me off a lot, and it took me out of the film from the get-go, and I felt like I was always behind the 8 ball to see what they were saying and all that. And I mentioned the sound earlier in the very beginning of this video. It's a big problem. It overshadows the dialogue. It's so many times where you can't actually hear what some of the characters are saying. And on top of that, the characters, they'll say things, and you'll hear what they say, and it should be something very meaningful, but they say it in a very kind of thrown away line, like it's just a throwaway line that doesn't mean that much. It's I can't give you all the examples. There were so many of them where there should have been instances where there was time to actually feel the weight of what was just said, but they just kind of rattle off dialogue quickly and chop to the next scene, and it was just putting me off all the time. And the lack of emotion in this film is glaring. I mean, the strongest emotional point of this film that there should be is really the relationship between Oppenheimer and his wife, played by Emily Blunt, and also his mistress, played by Florence Pugh. So that, and there's sort of a tragic story with Florence Pugh's character in that she commits suicide, but you don't get to know her enough at all. You don't care at all for their relationship, that by the time she commits suicide, that it feels tragic. It just feels very stale and just like another scene in the film, and because of the choppiness, it just feels like another thing that's happening, doesn't have any more or less weight than the scene that preceded it. So that aspect of that emotional relationship didn't hit. But then on the other side with Emily Blunt's character, she's the doting wife who loves him despite his flaws. They have these scenes together where they're talking but they're not really connecting, and then they'll show them riding horses out in the wild, in the valley, and it's like, what's the purpose of that scene? It's just showing them riding horses, but doesn't show any kind of meaningful connection between them, of what's the meaning of this scene. It's just because for a 3-hour film, you got to justify your reasoning for being 3 hours, but at this point you're just throwing in scenes there, but they have no real feel or meaning to them. They're trying to show that they have a deep relationship by showing them riding horses together. That didn't mean anything. It didn't lead to anything, and what was the point of it? Those scenes were meaningless. So yeah, the really lack of emotion in this film, and this has been a problem with Christopher Nolan films of late. Tenet, you look at the last one, none of the characters you care about, there's no emotional attachment between any of them, no relationships or anything like that. Dunkirk, you don't even get to know any of the characters really. It's been really stale now for a bunch of his last films. Really, the last film that you found any emotion in was Interstellar, basically, and since then it's all been downhill from the emotional aspect. I felt he's gotten so much, become so obsessed with the technical side of filmmaking that he's lost the sort of the emotional side of it, and the drama of filmmaking, and it's completely lost here in this film. And it's sad. It's really sad to see, because he's got such a great cast to work with who can really bring the emotion when they need to, and they're giving it their all. But I feel just the editing of this film and the dialogue or whatever it is holding them back. I feel this whole film is really an encapsulation of who Christopher Nolan is as a director at this point in time. Not what he once was or anything like that, what he is now. He is everything great and bad about cinema, in the sense that he brings the technical prowess, the cinematography, the ambition to his films, like the practical effects, all of these things. But then on the flip side, it's just completely devoid of emotion and drama. None of the scenes have any real meaning. They'll have meaning in the sense of like conveying the plot and progressing the plot, but not meaning in the sense of caring about these characters. Oppenheimer, you feel the most for, but throughout this whole film, he's present. Like, I can't even think of a scene where he's not present. He's everywhere in this film, and so you do start to feel emotions for him, particularly in the last hour of the film. But really, you think about all the amazing actors you've got in this film, and none of them really have any emotional attachment. So yeah, ultimately I have thought like much more negative thoughts for this film than positive, and I think it's because I hold Christopher Nolan in a very high regard. He's made some incredible films, and so I hold him to a high standard, and I feel like he hasn't lived up to it. I'm not measuring him against other lesser films. I'm measuring him in that upper echelons of like all-time directors, and so to me, in that sense, it was lacking. It didn't live up to it. But look, I still have to give credit where it's due. There's great aspects to this film, but there's also a lot of messy and bad parts to it, and so ultimately I'm ending up somewhere around a 6 out of 10 for this film, and that's me being nice, just because I respect that he's a great filmmaker who has the potential to make great things, but he's just lacking in these certain areas, and I want to see him return to really showing great emotion in his films. And yeah, so that's my overall thoughts on the film. I would love to know what you guys think of it. I realize my opinions on this film are most likely in the minority. I know it's getting rave reviews. It's doing really well at the box office. I'm happy for that. I want to see this film do well. I think these sorts of films we need to get more of these sorts of films in cinemas where they're like real cinema, not just like superhero films all the time, that sort of thing. You know, this is real cinema. And yeah, I would love to know what you guys think about this film. If you think I'm wrong, right, wherever it may be, post them in the comments section below. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you next time. Bye.